welcome to my podcast on real relationships. My name is Sophie Passon and I am a relationship expert, international speaker and best-selling author of the book Your Other Half. I decided to start this podcast because, in my opinion, relationships are currently not being portrayed as what they really are. Whether you're watching the news or social media, the perception given to people is wrong. And my aim is to talk about what happens in the real world, talk about real stories, and listen to what real people think, do, or go through, as opposed to creating expectations of something that doesn't actually exist. I may not agree with everything that is said by my guests, but it is their chance to express their opinions and their stories. So here today we have Annabel Stewart, sorry I can't even say it, Annabel Stewart, and we're going to talk about resilience and adversity. Hi Annabel, how are you?
Hi, I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
No worries at all. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Yeah, I'm married, live in the south of England. I have 3 kids and a dog, very typical suburban lifestyle. And my job, I'm freelance, but I work for various training or coaching providers, providing support to leaders in business, usually medium to corporate sized businesses, leadership coaching, anything that comes up, sometimes culture change projects, and people coaching, really. That's what I do, work with them and their teams.
Okay, so resilience. It's a big word to a degree, and sometimes people think they know what it means, but they don't really. How would you define resilience?
Yeah, so this is my big bugbear, because I think that we all have someone in our lives who we look at as kind of people who just sort of take things on the chin, or it's water off a duck's back, and they're kind of like tough, right? Mm-hmm. And actually we interchange that word tough with resilience. But if you looked at the sort of scientific explanation of what toughness is and what resilience is, it kind of gives us quite a good insight. So toughness, in a scientific kind of explanation, would be the ability for a material to absorb energy and deform without fracturing. Whereas resilience is the ability of an object to spring back to its original shape. Okay, so the difference between toughness is that you are impacting something, whereas resilience is no matter what happens to you, you can bring yourself back to your original form. And so looking at people who kind of things like water off a duck's back, or those types of people, actually they still feel the pain, they still feel the impact of what's happened to them, the sorrow, the sadness, the depression, or whatever it might be, but they have the tools and techniques to enable themselves to get back to their self.
So how does that link to adversity then? Would you say it's similar? What's the difference, so to speak?
So, well, when we're in adversity, when crisis happens, I mean, life is full of inevitable chaos. So when something of adversity hits us, we all go through a change or a way, the different emotions that we have. And there are kind of 4 stages that we would go through. We go through shock, denial, then anger and frustration at something. We get to a bit of an unhappy acceptance that something's happening to us. And then we start experimenting and trying to find our new normal. So people who have something happen to them, a big change or adversity happen to them, if people with high resilience levels can actually get themselves through that change quicker than people who don't necessarily have that level of resilience. But the beauty is resilience can be learned.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean we don't have to be born with it. People think they're more resilient than you, as it were. But it might just mean that they know themselves a little bit better and they can get through that change a little bit quicker. But it doesn't mean that they're more resilient than you. We can all learn how to move ourselves through.
And obviously, as you say, resilience can be learned, but you've got a very personal story of that.
Yeah, I think that I've had quite a lot of adversity happen, and therefore over the years I've been really fortunate to get to know myself really well and understand how I've built on my own resilience as I've gone through. And I lovingly call my working title of my life Bones, Boobs and Babies, and it's a bit of a story of broken bones, broken boobs, and a bit of a broken heart. And so as I go through that, I've been through lots of different things happen to me, and I've learned so much about myself as I've gone through it, that actually now when I'm put into a crisis situation or a situation with adversity, I recognize what's going on consciously rather than subconsciously, and therefore I can move myself through all those emotions that I mentioned earlier, the denial, the frustration, the kind of unhappy acceptance, a lot quicker than I would have done at the beginning. So it's kind of like a conscious awareness of that.
And I think because I've had a bit of a rough time myself, really, over the last sort of 10 years. But I think it got far worse in the last 3, because it was like one thing after another and big things over 6 months. And what I found really difficult is that a lot of people were saying, oh, look how strong you are and how well you're dealing with it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was okay. And yes, this was because I was forcing myself to face up to it, because I knew that otherwise he'd come back and bite me on the arse. But I found it difficult that people were like, oh, she's fine.
Yeah. Do you know, that happens all the time, and it's quite interesting because you see people kind of like putting a face on it, you know, out in the real world, and sometimes that face is actually quite important for yourself, right? Because some of those things that help you initially, those short-term fixes, which are things like your stance, putting yourself into a good stance, like the back straight. I know that sounds crazy, but what it does do is it changes the signals that are going through your body. So it changes what they're saying to your brain. Things like just smiling, that changes the signals. And we do that as a kind of coping mechanism. There are things we do to do that. Breathing, so when our lungs are breathing really, really quickly, we are sending different signals to our brain than when we're breathing slowly. So to help initially with short-term resilience, you can start to breathe, you know. And so we do that as a coping mechanism. And if the better you are at those things, the less people realize that you're still feeling the sorrow, you're still feeling the rubbish underneath all that. And it's called putting a face on it, but actually it's more to do with you being able to cope with the everyday life, as well as being able to cope with the stuff that's going on underneath.
Yeah, and I think that what I found really difficult at the time, and I'm really, you know, that's what I do. I know all of these things, but there's still a little human underneath, you know, me that knows all of these things. And I recall one thing that I found really difficult, which was that, you know, whilst I know that different people react to different things in different ways, you know, some people would really, as far as I'm concerned, overreact to nothingness.
Yeah.
When you know, you'd gone through like the washing machine sort of thing, quite literally being dragged through it. And I used to find that quite difficult as well, and having to take on, you know, all my skills and everything to kind of go through it, because otherwise I would have wanted to slap them.
But you know, it's interesting that, because I found that the biggest thing that's really helped me is forgiving people that. It's all relative, isn't it? So like if I break a bone, so a couple of years back I broke both my elbows at once, and I couldn't even, you know, do the basic of tasks, and we don't need to go there, but my husband did send me a message in hospital, and he said, don't come home until you can wipe your own. So I didn't, I made sure I could, but to me that was like, oh, this is a bit of a pain, but how can I get over it, you know? Because obviously, having broken lots of bones before, having been through 2 stillbirths, having had breast cancer, this is kind of like breaking both my elbows is like minor in my life, okay? Whereas to someone else who's never broken a bone ever before, that is major.
It's massive.
Yeah, it's massive. And so the washing machine breaking down type thing, right? To someone who has had a life that doesn't have those ups and downs in it, actually those things become really big. But also what you need to take into account sometimes is that we're all brimming, you know, we've all got a stress pot. We might be up to our eyes in it, and actually a little thing can send us over the top, whereas a big thing we've got the capacity to cope with sometimes, you know, and actually it's all relative. So I found
forgiving people their inability to cope with what seemingly looks like a little thing is really powerful to me. But I do completely understand your point of view. Yes.
But I think it's perception, isn't it? Because, you know, the person I'm thinking of when that happened, you know, she takes everything to the nth degree, where I really don't. And you know that of someone.
Yeah.
You know that. And it's a perception that people have of themselves, but also of others, isn't it?
Yeah. Definitely. Oh, perception is key, isn't it? Yeah. Being able to see things from other points of view, people's points of view, is a great life skill, actually. Some people seem to have that better than others. I think a lot of that, though, is about knowing yourself. If you can, and I do think it can be learned. So if you can do anything to do with self-awareness, any kind of self-awareness training. So I've done a lot of work with other people, and I think that's really helped me to know myself. And if you can take on any kind of self-awareness, any kind of opportunity where self-awareness presents itself, and there's loads of it all over the place, on the internet, at work, wherever, it's really a good thing to do, because the more you know yourself, the more you can then see things from other people's points of view, because you can see your own, and then you can see that other people are different, and different's okay. It's okay to be different to the other person. You know, I mean, my husband and I couldn't be more polar opposite. And it takes a lot of hard work, and it also takes a lot of thinking from the other person's point of view.
And I think this is the thing, you know, like in NLP.
So I've had a lot of practice at that too. Say that again, sorry.
Yeah. And I was just saying, in NLP, you know, you talk about, or no, you don't talk about it. Start again. In NLP, you know, one of the presuppositions is that we all see the world from our own map. And it's easy sometimes to forget that when you are feeling like you're being battered with said adversity, isn't it?
Yes.
But it's also, as you say, knowing yourself to be able to get past that. And I think for me, one of the massive things around resilience is the fact that you are facing up to it, where a lot of people will bury their head in the sand because they don't want the pain.
Yeah. Well, when we're in denial of things, you'll hear yourself say things like, when the schools were shutting, and we're like, oh, they'll never shut the schools. No, they're not going to do that. No, that won't happen to us. We're not in that area. And you say things like this, it's all denial, because actually it makes you feel better to be in denial, because you don't want the change to happen. Yeah, you're trying to reassure yourself. And at that time, you have the message coming strong and fast from your leader in your life, as it were. You know, earlier this year it would have been the government leading us through that massive change, and you'll hear them say, stay at home, stay at home, stay at home, stay at home. That message is just knocked in, and eventually you get to the point where you're not in denial anymore. Yeah. And actually you have to start accepting it, and it's a bit of an unhappy acceptance to begin with, possibly, and then you have to start trying to find a new way of living in that change, and that's when you can come out the other side. If you're resilient, or you're learning to be resilient and practicing resilience, a bit like a muscle, practicing, if you can actually identify when you're in those stages, then you can ask yourself, how do I get to the next stage? What do I need to do in order to get myself out of denial? So if I can do something that gets me out of denial, that will then get me into the unhappy acceptance. And then what do I do to get me out of the unhappy acceptance into trying to make this work and ultimately performing? So if you can kind of consciously recognize what you are going through, it makes a massive difference to speeding up that process.
And I think the other thing as well, sometimes some people don't want to get out of denial. They don't want to get out of any of these phases. They just want to stay as they are.
Yeah.
And for them, that's where it takes the longest, because it is what it was.
Yeah. Some people think they actually want to be in denial. But if they ask themselves really and truly, do you really want to be in denial, or would you rather be happy, accepting, performing, where would you really rather be? And we all know that the best place to be is we've accepted something, we're performing in it, we're enjoying our lives again. That actually we do need to go through the pain of acceptance in order to move on. And so denial is not actually, it feels happier temporarily, but it's not a particularly nice place to be on the long term. And nor is the unhappy acceptance. Depression sets in. So it's okay not to be okay, but it's not okay to stay there. So you've got to put in things to get yourself out of that unhappy acceptance by trying new things and trying new things out.
And I think the thing that we sometimes forget as well is we're wired to want safety, to want comfort,
very much.
And we're wired to also survive. But denial is really when we want that place of comfort back. We don't want it. We want things. And this is not just about dealing with something difficult that happens to us. It's also, I think, for other situations. For instance, if you take someone who's probably a bit older and doesn't like technology, they would want to go back to that place where you didn't need it. Back in my day, it was so much better because blah, blah, blah.
Yes, very much so. We are absolutely hardwired to be wary of change. We absolutely are. But when you're in that experimenting mode, you're even asking, you want, like, so if you're dipping your toe in the water, experimenting this new change, you almost are you're hardwired to want it to be too hot or too cold, right? But what happens when actually that temperature is just right? Because if you experiment enough, that temperature will be just right and you start to learn. But you're absolutely right. We are hardwired to be wary of change. So that's why you have to bring it into your conscious thought in order to move on.
And I think the other thing that goes with all of this is control and free will. I had a massive thing about free will again a few years ago where I was really questioning it. I think I'm somehow still questioning it to a degree, but maybe a little bit less. But I think we all want control because that, once again, is what makes us feel safe. But sometimes we don't have control. We have the appearance of having control, and actually we don't have it at all.
Yeah, and actually a really good exercise to do is to draw a circle where that anything in that circle is within your control, and anything outside of that circle is out of your control. And it's a really good exercise to do that. I know that when I lost my first baby, and I obviously had no control over that, he stopped moving, and I had to go and to the hospital. And so what was in my control was that I could go and get medical help, I suppose.
Yeah.
What was out of my control was that he had died, and then all the things that come after that. You're in a place where actually is it in my control where I choose how he's buried, or is it in my control that I choose where I am or how much time I spend with that baby? And also I suppose your decision making at that time is rubbish, like really bad. So you make choices that you possibly, when you look back on, you would not do in the same way, but at that time that was what was in your control. That was what helped you. And again, I come back to forgiveness. I've had to forgive myself decisions that I would have possibly done differently had I had more kind of control over my own brain at the time, or my own emotions. If I look back, there are things that I think I would have done differently, but I have had to forgive myself, because you can't live your life with wandering, with all that regret and all that turmoil going on. So again, I come back to forgiveness has been really powerful for me in my life.
And I think the thing as well, I was thinking the other day, because this is quite a significant time at the moment for me, and I was thinking to myself, if you'd known 5 years ago what was about to unfold with that one decision, would you have done it? And the answer is probably no, certainly wouldn't have.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's no point going over that, because I also believe that things are meant to happen a certain way. And I probably become, through the hardship and through having to learn resilience and through adversity, become a far better person and way more equipped to help other people as well as myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to go through, I mean, there are things that other people might go, what were you thinking? So after having, so I had 2 healthy babies, then 2 stillbirths, and then I went on to have another baby who was kicking and screaming, thank goodness. So I had 5 babies in 5 years. And I remember people saying, don't do it to yourself. What are you doing? Why are you doing that? Well, I don't regret any of that. But would I have, I don't know, you just have to just do what's right at the time, don't you? Would I change things? Well, I don't know. There are certain things I would change. For example, I didn't take folic acid with one of my pregnancies. I would change that if I could, because that might have changed the outcome, but it could have changed the whole of my life outcome, right? So therefore I wouldn't be where I am now. And what I do find is one of my biggest coping mechanisms, massive coping mechanism for me, and it makes me it really helps me, is that I have a really strong desire to help others when adversity hits me. So I spent a lot of my time when I had breast cancer, I spent a lot of my time on online forums helping other people to deal with it. When I had both my stillbirths, again, I spent a lot of time online chatting to people, helping younger people actually who sometimes just couldn't cope so well with the emotions or didn't have a stable relationship or whatever to, cope with that. A lot of my time helping people. I raised a lot of money, and I sound like some kind of hero, but I'm not. What I'm trying to say is I am a helper, and that helps me, if that makes sense. It is. And like this year, we've obviously got the coronavirus issue, and the first thing I'm doing is I'm on the volunteer lines. That's what I'm doing. Because I know that that's how I will cope. I'll cope better if I'm helping other people. And it's handy, obviously, because we need people to help people. But for me, it's very much a coping mechanism. And recognizing that in myself means that I do it much quicker. I get onto that much quicker now when something happens,
If people could spend like a little bit of time getting to know themselves, then they would react to things much better too.
Yeah, definitely. So I also know something about myself, and other people will be very different. We're not the same at all. But when something happens, when crisis happens, I'm a real researcher. I go right into the detail. So I literally will spend the whole of my life sitting there. I read medical journals. I don't understand them, but I read them and pick out the bits that I do understand. I read all sorts of stuff until I've got to a point where I've got the knowledge that I need in order to then redirect that energy into helping. And I do it every single time. And it's
interesting how you react like that. I mean, in a crisis, I didn't know this at the time, but I was always put into positions when I was in the corporate world of managing others, because what I didn't know until, I'm not going to say recently, but much after I left the corporate world, shall we say, is that if you take the DISC scoring system, in an emergency or a crisis, I'm Hitler. Yeah. I take charge, right? It's for dominance, it's the influence, and everything else that goes with compliance or steadiness is down the pan somewhere.
Yeah.
And that's why they used to put me in all these positions, but we're very reactive.
Yeah.
Because they knew I'd handle it.
Yeah. And you can shape everybody into, rally the troops, off we go. Yeah. This is our common goal, and off we go. And but that's fine, because that's the type of person you are, and other people aren't like that. But what's really important is that people get to know who they are. So just as important is, if you are not that sort of person, is not to put yourself in a situation where you are not going to cope. Right? Because that makes it worse. If you're the person who actually just needs to center themselves, go and do some yoga, go for a run, whatever that is, that's far worse. Yes, that's what you need to do. Don't just put yourself forward for the bits you can cope with, not the bits you can't. But that all takes knowing yourself.
Yeah.
And if you've got any opportunity to get to know yourself a bit better, you should take it, definitely.
And I think a lot of people need to. One of the things I often hear when people contact me to find out a bit more and blah, 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 it's always something along the lines of, oh, I'm a bit scared what I'm going to find out.
Yeah.
I'd be really excited to find out, you know. And I think we need to change that, because we think that it's looking and knowing yourself is a pointing the finger exercise, and it isn't. It's about learning how you react to things so that you can react even better.
Yeah, and no judgment, you know. And I think we've got to beware of the pedestal thing that we do, you know, where we have people, these inspirational people on pedestals, and we look at them and we think, well, I'll never be like that. I could never do that. I could never do that. It's okay that you can never do that, because you're different, and therefore you're going to react differently. And once you've got to know who you are and how you react, and you're comfortable with that, that's what
it doesn't matter.
No, that's what makes the difference. To put someone into an inspirational pot, right, makes the divide bigger. So it means you can never reach it, because you put this massive gap between you and them. So whilst it's lovely to learn from people and be inspired by people, actually putting them on a pedestal is not really a great thing to do, because it means that you feel that you should be more like them, and that is not what resilience is. It's not what you are. You need to be more like you, but you need to be able to deal with it.
It's not even worse than that. It's not even to be more like them. Is that you feel that you should be more. And yes, we can aspire to more, but we don't have to be more. We are who we are, and we've got our own goals, our own aspiration. We don't need to feel that we have to have more, but that's what TV and social media and that sort of stuff, kind of does, because it makes you feel inadequate a lot of the time, where actually you're not.
No, and none of us are inadequate, none of us. But if you can be the best version of yourself, that's the key, isn't it? Right? But some of us, like you or like I, are there to lead. Some of us are the ones that other people might put on those pedestals. And I say be wary of those pedestals, because what I do is very visual. So people see it, they see me helping, they see what I'm doing. But I'm a real kind of like advocate of, please don't put me in that bracket, because actually this is just me helping myself. This is just me doing what I do best. You do what you do best. But do it for you. Get to know yourself and do what you do best. Don't try and do what I'm doing.
So we're actually getting towards the end of our time together, believe it or not. What would be your best tip for someone who wants to be the best version of themselves, and actually become more resilient and go through difficult times better?
Yeah. Do you know what one of the first things I would do is really get to know the stages that people go through when shock or something hits. If you can look up the change curve, is the easiest way to Google something like that. So look up change curve, look at those different stages, the denial and the frustration, the unhappy acceptance, and then the flowing out of their experimentation. Look up those, and actually, for any change that's in your life, ask yourself, where am I on this curve? What are those feelings I'm feeling? What are the physical symptoms of that? So it might be biting your nails or heart rates or whatever it might be. And start to try to recognize, bring those things into your conscious thought. And then ask yourself, what do I need to do to move on to the next stage? What do I need to do to move on to the next stage? And you'll be amazed once you start looking at yourself internally, how those questions and answers will come up. And sometimes you might not be able to ask yourself. Get a friend to ask you the questions, or someone to ask you those questions, and try to delve a little bit deeper into yourself, and you'll be surprised at what comes out.
Right, Annabel, thank you so much for today. I think we could talk forever and a day.
Yep, definitely.
And for everybody else, if you enjoyed the show, then please subscribe, leave us a review, but more importantly, come back for the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you very much.